Welcome, dear listener, and thank you for joining me to hear one more tale, one more story to keep us warm at night. It is, as always, my pleasure to read for you Into Outer Darkness by H.R. Wakefield, narrated by Sean Charles for Nightshade Audio. "All right," said Richard Lytton. "I've promised to come. I've told you I consider the whole thing futile and pointless, but I'm not backing out." "I know how you feel," said Alec Propert. "It's just that I'll feel more satisfied after you've been there, tested it, as it were." He sipped his port delicately, clipped a cigar, and lit it. "You must realize," said Lytton, "it can't prove anything useful from your point of view. Remember, some people can't hear a bat scream, others can. In some such way there are those who are susceptible to psychic things, and those who aren't." "I dare say," replied Propert impatiently, his bland, precise, subaltern's face clouding. "And if my father hadn't guessed wrong over that damned mine, and I could afford to live there, I shouldn't care two hoots. But it's rented at 3,000, and I can't let it because of, well, because of what? That's just what I don't know, and that's where you may help me. It's damned bad luck, I know, but what help can I be? You can vet the place, as it were." Lytton burst out laughing. "What, just by putting my head in the door and peering around? An ordinary person couldn't, I know, but you're a sort of specialist. You've got that kind of instinct. If there's anything phony about a place, you detect it. You greatly overrate that. I may be a little more receptive to such things than most people. Unfortunately, that is all. Is it unfortunately? I think so. But it's never dangerous, is it? How absurd that sounds. What's it? What are all these its? "Occurrences, whose causes we are ignorant of," said Lytton. "Not very illuminating, that. Well, imagine the proverbial visitor from Mars arriving on this earth after the last man has disappeared from it. Imagine him coming on derelict transmitters and wireless sets, and conceiving, by a flash of intuitive genius, a casual connection between them. Suppose then he devoted himself to tracing it. One line of inquiry might lead him to the discovery of some of the physical laws governing this planet. Another may be to death at a dynamo. Substitute psychical for physical, and question mark for dynamo. Then such things can be dangerous," said Propert. "Not to one's body, perhaps. I'm not sure about that, but to one's mind. They're outside one's proper range of perception, so that they can be profoundly disruptive. One's mind is not constructed to cope with them. Like ultraviolet shades, they exist, but are not for us. Now, tell me more of the circumstances. I suppose your family has always known the manor was haunted. A vague word, but it'll have to do." "Yes, I realize that now, and I suppose always subconsciously knew it." "Then it didn't trouble you?" "We never talked about it. That was a sort of unwritten law. Some people make a joke of their ghosts, others shut up about them. We were like that." "Have you ever seen anything?" "Never. I haven't the vaguest idea what there is to see, if any. I tell you, the subject was so taboo that if my mother had seen something the night before, she wouldn't have battered an eyebrow at breakfast. I forgot, how many lets have you had?" "4. "And they've all cleared out before their time was up?" "Yes, though they were all short terms." "Surely they gave you some reason?" "They each said much the same dumb thing. that circumstances had arisen which forced them to alter their plans. But I've heard gossip from the village. The Sussex peasant is as ghost-ridden as ever he was. You'd think with charabancs and radio, well, it has made precious little difference. Catch one of the Whittlingites going up our drive after dark of his own free will. And that's how I've always explained it. That these people brought their own servants, and as soon as they arrived, the locals got joined to them. And it got back to the people in the house, and they began seeing things. Anyway, they all left in a hurry, and apparently were glad to go. Nothing more definite than that? Well, there was one rather queer thing. The last people who took it were an American millionaire and his family, and though they only took it for 6 months, I'm certain he meant to stay on if it suited him. His eldest son was an artist, and after they'd been there a week, he disappeared, and so far as I know, was never seen again. Possibly it wasn't so funny at that. He was known to be rather weird, and you know what artists are. Well, you know what I mean. You're not an artist, just a pen pusher. How do you mean disappeared? Just like that. They left him reading in the library when they went to bed, and though they did everything, searched, dragged the lake, put the cops on and whatever, they never found a trace of him. And he left no message? Never even took his hat and coat, just seemed to pop right off the earth. When was this? 1929. I believe I remember reading about it. I expect you did. I suppose the Yank talked, for a lot of reporters came down and there were bits in the papers about it. What kind of bits? Oh, something about a bloke having been walled up in the manor during the civil wars. A common enough example of the myth-maker's art, said Lytton, smiling. But walling up was certainly an old English custom. But do you mean to tell me there was no such tradition in your family? I told you, we never talked about it, replied Propert uncertainly. But I should be a liar if I said I'd never heard anything of the sort, but only the half-remembered echo of a whisper, if you know what I mean. I don't know when or how I heard it, but somehow it sounded familiar when I read it, unmistakably familiar. I can tell you this, if there is anything queer about the manor, it's connected with the library. I must sound like a fool, because I can't tell how I know that. I've never seen anything and can't remember being told. It may be that I heard it in the nursery. I simply don't know. There was just this, too. At the end of the library, there's a door leading to some stairs. One flight leads up to the gallery, the other down to the cellars. At the bottom of the stairs, there's a very heavy old oak door, which was always kept locked. We never asked why. You know how children accept such things. In fact, I don't remember anyone going down those stairs. I know how vague all this sounds. I realize what you mean, said Lytton, but you must get it into your head that even if I get any sort of reaction to the place, which is exceedingly improbable, I can't do anything about it. I've no formula for exorcisement. I've no rough on ghosts to sprinkle in the library. I recognize all that, but if you tell me the house is a wrong 'un, I mean by that if you don't think it's odds-on that anyone who took it would probably get the breeze up, then I shall sell it to another American millionaire, numbered brick by numbered brick, and he can number the ghosts and take them west with the other doings. Let's have another drink, and then I'll get the car. There's no light in the place, by the way. We made our own juice, so we'll have to rely on my lamp. They had one more drink, and Propert went out to get the car ready. Well, he'd have to go now, thought Lytton, lighting a cigarette. Alec had been badgering him for months to bring this about, this perfectly vain excursion. Certainly to drop 3,000 a year, and especially from such a dim, intangible cause, was exceedingly infuriating. even though Alec wasn't exactly starving. Though Alec might have had a bland subaltern appearance, he had a shrewd money-spinner's knack, and with a 7-room flat in Park Lane, and this much-coveted cottage, to say nothing of a fat car and a light plane, he was at least above the breadline. But the crowding thoughts of all he could be doing with that 3,000 gave the poor fish no peace. 3,000, almost literally spirited away. An odd yarn that, about the millionaire's son. The Chateau Vignon over again sounded very like it. Anyway, after persistent beseechings, he'd agreed to this folly. It was a pity Alec had ever discovered his small repute as a clairvoyant, but that article he'd had printed had given the show away. No doubt most people would think he was making much ado about nothing, but most people were fools, and he intensely disliked any kind of ghost hunt. If those who took part in them knew even as much as he had cause to know of the latent might of those blind powers they joked about, they'd try to call no spirits from the vastly deep, not even one silent shadow moving through the dusk, but build up great Maginot lines of resistance to keep those tense, straining potentials within their proper frontiers. These flippant, carefree triflings could be dangerous, and he was about to partake in one from which he'd always flinched, obscurely but starkly. Then there was that odd feeling he'd known recently, as if he had no future, as if he'd never see his name on the title page of a book again, as if, very literally, his tale was told. As if he might suddenly look in a mirror and see nothing there. He shook himself and lit a cigarette. "Come along," said Probert, putting his head in the doorway. "It's 10:30. Lytton got up heavily and followed him to the hall. It was a sparkling night, very still, and with a half-moon whose glow outlined the rim of the downs 10 miles to the south. Probert headed the car towards them. "Dick," said Probert after a while, "you're sure this couldn't be dangerous? You've asked me that once, and I've answered you. I want to ask you again. I'm thinking of that dynamo. If you say it could be, I'll gladly turn back. You see, I'm out of my depth. Rather than let you run any risk, I'd—" Lytton laughed. "My dear Alec, do you think I might go west too with a number on my back? Step on it." "Here we are," said Probert, half an hour later. He got out, opened the high iron gates, and climbed back into the car. The drive seemed to lead right into the bowels of the downs. It climbed quietly for half a mile, swung to the left through a high, dense coppice, and ended abruptly at Whittling Manor. "That's the dear old hovel," said Probert. "You ought to see it by daylight. Experts say it's about the best early Tudor in Sussex." The old house loomed above them, the moonlight shining faintly on the rows of diamond panes. Facing them was a polished oak door set back in the arch. Probert took a key from his pocket, and by the light of his torch thrust it into the keyhole. "Come on," he said. As he crossed the threshold, Lytton hesitated for a moment, then moved forward. He knew again that strange, passive, receptive sensation, half expectant, half resigned, which he had known many times before, that cue that he was about to be used. He knew too well by now that it was useless to resist it. "This is the great hall," said Probert, waving his torch about. "The library's through to the left." They picked their way past chairs and tables shrouded in dark covers. They passed through an arched doorway into a short passage. Probert opened another door at the end of it. "Here we are," he said. By the light of the lamp, the room looked huge. Bookcases, their contents shrouded by hanging curtains, stretched from floor to ceiling. "It runs the whole length of this wing," said Probert, in a loud whisper. "Used to be 3 rooms, but my great-great took down the walls." They paced the length of the high, quiet watching room, the small beam breaking its way through the darkness. At the far end there was another door. "This is the one I told you about," said Probert. He opened it, and there were the stone stairs. "Like to go down?" "No," said Lytton. Probert closed the door again and turned the beam down the room. It looked cavernous, unending. "Isn't it a glorious room?" said Probert. "Well, you can imagine it." They went back to the other end. Probert unclipped the covers over 2 armchairs. "Now, I suppose," he said, "the procedure is that we await its pleasure. Will you be cold?" "No," said Lytton. "Await whose pleasure?" "Well, really yours," replied Probert, with a short laugh. "Shall we talk?" "No," said Lytton. "Then let me know when you're ready to go." He switched off the lamp and lit a cigarette. Lytton watched the eager, sparkling tip of the cigarette descend, and then diminish very slowly to a pinpoint. He became rigid and inert. Slowly the pinpoint grew larger, splintered, and the splinters danced, settled, heightened, and he was staring down at a double row of candles, the thin smoke from their flames fluttering away and becoming straight again. Their flames made small, disturbed pools of light on the rough surface of the table, and etched light and shade on the figures around it, so that their hands were white and clear, and their faces shadow-flecked and dappled. The figure at the end of the table raised its right hand above its head, so that its huge shadow stained the wall. The other figures raised their right hands. The torch poured its smoke against the crouching ceiling. The smoke went searching along the ceiling and recoiling. The smoke poured up straight, and it was dark. He passed his hands over the stone, edging at the cracks where the wall turned in on him. He breathed hard, for it was hard to breathe. He clenched his fists and struck at the stone. He knelt down and ran his nails against the cracks where the walls met the floor. He breathed harder, for it was harder to breathe. He hurled himself against the walls, struck against the ceiling, fell to his knees and drove his nails into the cracks where the walls met the floor. He opened his mouth and flung his hands into his ears as the roar broke on them. He hurled himself against the walls, struck the ceiling, beat against the stone. He flung himself down and clawed at the cracks. He opened wide his mouth, searching for breath, for his bursting heart, but he could breathe no longer. Far away, he could see a tiny beam of light, eager and sparkling. It grew larger and was gone. "Well, Dick," said Probert, yawning, "had enough? It's 1:30. Shall we beat it?" He spoke louder. "Dick, are you asleep? Wake up." He got up and switched on the lamp. He gazed down at the gasping, fading shadow in the chair, and then he screamed out, "Dick!" as the torch slipped from his trembling hand.